Remakes are like some of the most polarizing items in pop culture today. You announce a beloved property is coming back and you get a stream of opinions leaning either to throwing money at the screen or sharpening pitchforks. But whether you reside on one side or another, we can all agree that doing this is the safe choice. Much like rebooting a computer, it's become the default response to a failing industry. If an original film flopped, just make it up with a reboot. That simple. It's an instant money machine, for the most part. Of course, there's good reboots with something to say and add to the universe, but for the most part, it isn't, until you look to different mediums outside of film. Don't get me wrong, video games have had their fair share of shitty reboots. But as of recently, we've been having a bit more of a renaissance in reintroducing the franchises of yesteryear back into popular culture. Most recently of which has been Resident Evil, or Resident Evil 7. No, that logo isn't a coincidence. This is a reboot at heart. It's a game with a completely different view of the series, adapting a more PT style horror theme to it. But on a deeper level, it's not that different. And that's perfect. I believe a reboot should only exist when necessary. When a series has lost its form, when there's no way to bring it back other than pressing that restart button. And for what it's worth, games have been taking this to heart recently. Resident Evil was once a gripping horror series that eventually evolved into a sorry excuse for action games, so I'd say that restart was necessary. But there's still core changes to the formula here. The game is no longer third person, it's now in the first person point of view, changing the root of the game that makes it so distinctively, in a way, not a return to form. It's this delicate balance of new ideas mixed with mergers of old tried and true methods. But while that change to first person is revolutionary for this series, some reboots don't need that. All they need is a bit of blood. The only way for me to describe Doom accurately is f***ing rad. It's dark, disturbing, fast, gross, and wholly rewarding, and it's in many ways a reboot as it is a continuation of the franchise. I don't mean that the game takes off right where the last one ended. I mean it like this. Doom 2016 is everything the original created by id Software back in the 90s aimed to be. When John and Adrian Carmack, Tom Hall, and John Romero came together, their goal was to make a bloody, satisfying, and purely brutal game, and they achieved that. You could blow demons' brains out, chop them in half, but more than that, it was a technical masterpiece. No other game created such a masterful, sadistic, and beautiful game for MS-DOS. That just wasn't happening at the time. Now skip forward more than 20 years later, and this new Doom is all of that and a lot more. It's brutal, disturbing, and deeply satisfying. A lot of what makes this new Doom so good is the borrowing of ideas and groundwork set by the previous games. The demons, the straightforward storyline, and the goals. See, 2016 Doom shares those goals of id Software in the 90s and brings it over to a new generation. Instead of making their own ideology and creating this framework for a video game from the ground up, they took the main ideology of the original creators and tried to find a new home for it in this generation. They were not only able to push what consoles could do, making these beautiful worlds run at 60 FPS on a notoriously underperforming generation, but fully create a new game that captures the magic of the original while naturally creating a new spin, something completely their own, just by understanding the mindset of the creators. When making a reboot, you have to ask yourselves a few questions. Why did this series do so well, and what did the creators want to create? This is where reboots, reimaginings, re-whatevers succeed and fail. Look at Batman vs. Superman, but specifically Batman. He failed as a character, not because of Ben Affleck or the CGI or the action scenes, but because of a lack of understanding of both why the previous series prevailed and what the creators that defined Batman wanted him to be. Instead, Zack Snyder got into his head that Christian Bale's Batman only succeeded because of the action scenes. So he made them better, and somehow Snyder also decided to reinvent the hero by removing one of his core principles and making him a murderer. Something that directly violates almost every piece of Batman fiction. A character defining trait gone. just because of the need to be different. We all live in this world where everything we do and create is becoming more and more unoriginal. Because of this, we start to have this inherent need and thirst to be different and stray away from the pack. But as much as it's nice to do your own thing, sometimes you get lost within that and forget your roots. On the other side, some get caught up in doing the same thing over and over, hoping to achieve a different goal, and they don't get to experiment. These polar opposites are where most reboots stand. They try to flip genders for no reason, change up the genre, switch viewpoints, and they get caught up in these gimmicks to get people to be interested, and they forget the core principles. They forget what makes these properties special in the first place. That's why I love the new Ratchet & Clank. It's a remake that remembers what made it good and just amplifies that to 100. But that's also a dangerous slope too, because then you can get caught up in making the same thing over and over. There needs to be that gray area. Whether it's with a reboot or someone doing something creative, we need to live in that in between. If you go too far either way, you're lost. I'm not saying video games are perfect. The only reason we don't have as many screw-ups recently is because we're just a young industry. Film has decades over us. Decades of success and decades of failure. But if any industry or person can learn one thing from video games, I'd say it's to find that middle ground. If you have an idea, roll with it. Just don't forget what made those special memories special in the first place. Don't forget the love that people had, and most importantly, remember, if you screw up, don't worry about it, because thousands will let you know when you do.
Rubies red, my skin too black to blush, this shit too red to brush. Seen it on the iPhone pages, the same on the gram, Wizard of OZ. Pockets full of mint leaf, why been smelling like it brushed tea. Say cheese, see the porcelain, sands and water, see swordfish.